Picture this. You wake up before the alarm, before the church bells, before Thomas leaves for work, and the first thing your body tells you, before you've even opened your eyes, is that something is wrong. Not wrong the way fever is wrong, not wrong the way bad food is wrong. Wrong the way a locked door is wrong when you are certain you had the key. Your stomach is moving, and you are lying completely still. This is London in February of 1863, and the room smells of cold ash and leather glue seeping up through the floorboards from the cobbler's shop below, and something else. Something that wasn't there a month ago. A faint, close, warm smell that you cannot identify and cannot stop noticing. The kind of smell that makes the back of your throat tighten. You've been lying completely still for 11 mornings in a row. It always gets worse if you move. So let's talk about that. About what it actually meant to suspect you were pregnant in Victorian England. Not the romantic version. Not the glowing bride with her hands folded over her belly, gazing serenely at the horizon. The real version. The version where the only test you can take is the one your body is running on you, without your consent, without your full understanding, and with absolutely no guarantee of a result for another 4 months at minimum. The version where there is no plus sign, no blood test, no ultrasound, no app to track your cycle and tell you your probability of conception. Nothing except a set of physical clues that your body is producing and you're trying to read in the dark in a language you were never properly taught. How did Victorian women know? What did they feel? Who did they ask? What did the doctors actually do in that careful, circumlocutory, desperately modest era? And what happened when they found out? What did it mean, socially and physically and financially, to be in that condition, in that century, in this city? I make these history episodes for Sleeping To, and I want to tell you that this is one of the stranger ones to research, because so much of it happened in silence. Victorian women left almost no direct accounts of early pregnancy. They didn't write about it in their diaries mostly, or if they did, it was in the same euphemistic language they used to speak about it, oblique, gestural, careful. What survives instead is the medical literature, which is a particular kind of horror in its own right, and the advice manuals, which are worse, and the oral tradition, which is almost completely lost except for the fragments passed down through midwives and herbalists, and the kind of neighbour who's had 6 children and knows things. Get comfortable. Here we go. Your name is Ellen Marsh. You're 22 years old, and you have been married to Thomas Marsh, junior bookkeeper at Grayson & Sons on Gray's Inn Road, for 8 months and 13 days. Before that you were Ellen Saunders, of Finsbury, daughter of a printer and a woman who died of childbed fever when you were 8 years old. And you have been sewing other people's clothes since you were 14 to help your father keep the family intact. You live in 2 rooms above Mr. Finch's cobbler's shop on Rosebery Avenue, Clerkenwell. The rooms cost 6 shillings a week. The front room faces the street and serves as sitting room, workroom and kitchen simultaneously. The cooking done over the small cast-iron grate, and the sewing done at the table by the window, where the light is best between 10 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon. The back room is the bedroom. It contains a bed, a washstand with a basin and jug, a single wooden chair, and a chest of drawers in which you keep the better things. Thomas's good shirt, the tablecloth your aunt gave you as a wedding gift, and in the bottom drawer under everything else, a small tin box containing what you think of, privately and without ever having said it out loud, as the beginning money. The money that will eventually, some day, allow you to move somewhere with a proper kitchen and perhaps 1 additional room. the room smell of Thomas's pipe tobacco in the evenings, of the leather and glue from below at all times, and of the particular combination of sizing and thread, and the faint warm smell of a tallow candle that constitutes your working smell, the smell of the piecework you do for Mrs. Alderton's dressmaking establishment on Regent Street. Fine work, finishing work, the kind that requires good eyes and absolutely steady hands. You've been behind on the finishing work for 2 weeks now. This is because of the mornings. The mornings have become a problem. It started on a Tuesday, the kind of cold February Tuesday that is indistinguishable from all the other cold February Tuesdays, except that on this particular one, you woke up at 7:15 and sat up too quickly and had to grab the edge of the mattress with both hands and breathe through your nose for approximately a minute before the room stopped trying to rotate around you. You thought, I am getting ill. You thought, the cold air in this room is too much in the mornings. I need to build the fire before I try to get up. You thought, reasonably enough, this will pass. 11 days later, it has not passed. What it has done instead is elaborate. The dizziness is now accompanied by nausea, not the violent, unambiguous nausea of actual illness, but something subtler and more persistent, a low-rolling wrongness in your stomach that sits there from approximately 7:15 until somewhere between 9 and 9:30, when it lifts suddenly like a hand removing pressure, and you feel almost normal. And then the smells. The smells are new, and they are, frankly, unnerving. Mr. Finch's leather has always been there. In 7 months you've been no more aware of it than you are of the wallpaper. In the past 11 days it has become. You search for the right word and cannot find one that isn't excessive. It has become an event. It is the first thing you notice when consciousness returns in the mornings, before the cold, before the light, before the nausea itself. The smell of cured leather and the chemicals Mr. Finch uses for his work rising through the floorboards and arriving in your nose like something with intention. Not just the leather, everything. Thomas's pipe, unbearable. You've said nothing about this because Thomas has smoked a pipe since before you met him, and it would be strange and difficult to explain why it has suddenly become offensive in a way it was not before. The tallow candle you use for evening work, nauseating in a way that makes your throat constrict and your eyes water, so that you have taken to moving it to the far end of the table, burning it as far from your nose as possible, while still being able to see by its light. The boiled cabbage smell from the family on the ground floor, the Finches, not the cobbler, a different family who rent the front ground floor room and whose wife cooks cabbage with what seems like absolute relentless frequency. This smell, which you have previously been able to ignore entirely, has become a daily ordeal. Your own body. That is the strangest one. A warm, slightly salt-iron smell that you have begun to associate with the mornings, with the sheets, with a narrow space between the bed and the washstand. That is unlike anything you can compare it to. You have not told Thomas about any of this. You're sitting on the edge of the bed. Your feet are on the floorboards, which are cold. The fire went out last night, and the room temperature in the early mornings in February 1863, in a 2-room flat above a cobbler's shop in Clerkenwell, is approximately the temperature of a decision you have been putting off. You have been sitting here for 2 minutes. This is the routine now. Sit, breathe, wait for the room to settle, then move. The light coming through the curtains is grey and thin. A cart is passing in the street below. You can hear the horses' hooves on the cobbles, the groan and creak of wooden wheels, The driver saying something to someone in a voice too low to hear. Already the city is awake. London is always awake. London in 1863 contains approximately 3 million people, which means that at any hour of any day, several 100,000 of them are actively moving around, doing things, making noise, going somewhere with a cart. 3 million people in this city, and you are sitting on the edge of a cold bed with your hands folded in your lap and your stomach doing what it does, trying to decide what you know. Here is what you know. Your monthly course has not come. It was expected by your own careful reckoning approximately 5 weeks ago. You've never been a regular in your life. Your mother, when she was alive, called it your reliable quality, said it in a tone that was half pride and half something else, something you are only beginning to understand now, 5 weeks late. You have never been more than 3 days late in your life. You have been nauseous every morning for 11 days. Your chest is tender. This is the detail that makes you press your lips together when you think about it. Not because it is painful, it isn't really, more a heightened sensitivity, an awareness, but because it is so specific, so unlike anything you have experienced before. Your breasts feel different, heavier somehow than the actual physical weight of them warrants. A fullness that sits there constantly reminding you of itself. You have had to loosen the front fastenings of your stays by a hook on each side, something you did yesterday morning with your back to Thomas, moving quietly, hoping he wouldn't notice. He didn't notice, or he pretended not to. With Thomas, it is sometimes difficult to distinguish between these two things. You stand up carefully, rolling to your side first and then pushing upright, the way you have learned to do over the past 11 mornings. The technique of it. You have developed a technique for getting out of bed. This seems to you, in a way you cannot quite articulate, significant. The washstand is in the corner. The water in the jug is cold. You'll need to boil some on the fire before you can wash properly, but the fire isn't lit yet, and your face is sufficient with the cold water from the basin, and you will deal with the hair later. You pour a small amount into the basin. Break the thin skin of ice on top with your knuckle. It is cold enough for that this morning. The cold water on your face is a relief, clean and sharp and immediate. Your nose takes a deep breath of the plain, cold morning air before the leather smell reasserts itself. Your reflection in the small mirror above the washstand shows you the same face you've always had. This is genuinely strange to you. Every morning you look in the mirror and are surprised by the ordinariness of it. The brown hair, slightly tangled, pinned up roughly because you haven't done it properly yet. The grey-green eyes, the unremarkable nose and mouth, the pale February complexion that belongs to every woman in London between November and April. You look like yourself. Nothing about you looks like a woman who has been taken over, because that is how it feels when you are honest with yourself in these early morning moments before the day gets going, and there are things to do and nowhere for honesty to fit. It feels like an occupation, like something has moved in without asking and is now reorganizing the furniture. You dry your face. You get dressed. You are careful about the stays, loosening the front hooks by the same one hook on each side as yesterday, then smoothing everything into place so that nothing shows the adjustment. This is a skill you are developing. The skill of concealment, of managing a body that is beginning to change in ways that are not yet visible to anyone else, but that you can feel with a constant low-level, precise attention. The dress buttons up without difficulty. This is a relief. You check the fit across the chest in the mirror, tighter than it was last month, unmistakably, but still within the range of ordinary variation. Still deniable. Still something that could be attributed to the cold, to the angle of the mirror, to your imagination. For a little longer, in the front room, you lay the fire with paper and kindling, and 2 pieces of coal saved from last night, and you kneel on the hearth rug and strike the match, and watch the small flame take hold and begin to spread. The smell of sulphur from the match, sharp and momentary. The first warmth reaching your hands, which are stiff with cold, the knuckles reddened. While the fire catches, you think about what you're going to do. What you need specifically is information. You need someone who knows, not a doctor, not yet. Not yet, because a doctor means confirmation, and confirmation means the thing becoming real in a way that you can no longer manage privately, and you're not ready for that yet. Not because you are afraid of it, or not only because you are afraid of it, but because you know, with a knowledge that sits in your chest like a piece of furniture, solid and unmovable, that the moment you say the words to a doctor, everything changes. Thomas will have to be told. Plans will have to be made. The money in the tin box in the bottom drawer will have to be reconsidered. Everything will have to be reconsidered. What you need is someone who knows without it having to be official. Someone who can look at you and tell you whether you're reading your own body correctly, or whether there is some other explanation for the nausea and the lateness and the tightness of your stays. There is one obvious person, Mrs. Hartley, next door. You put the kettle on for tea. Mrs. Hartley is 43 years old and lives next door with her husband, who works at the printworks on Farringdon Road, and their youngest 3 children, the eldest 3 having left home at various points to begin their own iterations of this same pattern of 2 rooms and 6 shillings a week and the smell of someone else's cooking. Mrs. Hartley has had 6 children. 2 of them died before their first birthday. 4 survived, and she is matter-of-fact about all of it, in the way that women who have lived through childbirth and infant death and childbirth again sometimes become matter-of-fact. Not callous exactly, but with their sentimentality reserved for specific occasions and not wasted on abstractions. She and you share a landing. You have been neighbours for 7 months. She has taught you which market has the best vegetables on which days, and which butcher on Exmouth Street gives honest weight, and how to deal with the landlord's agent, who comes the first Friday of every month and has a tendency to find reasons why the rent has increased, reasons which are almost entirely fictional, and which Mrs. Hartley addresses by citing chapter and verse of the relevant statute in a voice of cheerful absoluteness until the agent goes away. You like Mrs. Hartley. You're also, on this particular subject, terrified of her. Not because she would be unkind, because she would know. The moment you knock on her door, she will look at you, and she will know, and then you will know that she knows, and the space of not quite knowing will close like a door. You drink your tea by the fire and think about it. You're behind on the waistcoats for Mrs. Alderton. 6 waistcoats, each requiring a full day of careful work. The buttonholes alone on a good waistcoat take 2 hours, and you have completed 3.5, and Friday is in 4 days. You need to work today. You need to sit at the table and thread the needle and do the careful work that requires your hands to be steady and your mind to be focused and your eyes to be rested, none of which is entirely the case this morning. You drink the tea. The warmth of it, spreading from your stomach outward, settles something. The nausea lightens slightly. This is another thing you have learned. Tea, taken carefully and slowly, first thing before anything else, makes the morning survivable. You don't know why. You only know that it works, and so you do it every morning, the kettle on before anything else, the cup in both hands, drinking it in the chair by the fire while the room warms. Your mother used to do the same thing. You remember her at the kitchen table in the house in Finsbury, always with a cup of tea, always in the mornings for as long as you can remember. You never knew why. You never thought to ask. You know now, or you're beginning to suspect that you know, what the tea was for. You finish the cup, set it down on the hearth, put the waistcoat, the half-finished one with its silk facing and the buttonholes that need to be worked, on the table by the window. Thread the needle in the grey morning light, and then you do something you have been not doing for 11 days. You let yourself think about it directly, not sideways, not in the oblique manner you have been employing since the first morning, the manner of attributing each symptom to some other cause, some entirely reasonable alternative explanation, some chance alignment of cold weather and bad sleep, and the particular strains of winter on a body that is working hard and not eating quite as well as it should. Not that. Directly, plainly. You sit with the waistcoat in your lap and the needle in your hand and the grey light coming through the window and the fire crackling behind you, and you think, I am pregnant. The words sit in your mind, quiet and heavy and entirely present. I am pregnant. You have been pregnant most likely for approximately 6 or 7 weeks. Long enough for the first signs to have arrived in such numbers and with such consistency that you cannot honestly continue to attribute them to anything else. The lateness, the nausea, the sensitivity of your chest, which has never happened to you before and which is, you know, because you have heard Mrs. Hartley say it to another woman on the landing, said it in that matter-of-fact way of hers, the way she says everything. One of the earliest signs. You sit with this knowledge for several minutes. The fire makes its sounds behind you. Then you pick up the needle and start on the buttonholes, because the waistcoats are due Friday, and because pregnancy or not, 6 shillings a week is still 6 shillings a week, and Mrs. Alderton does not pay for work not delivered, and the tin box in the bottom drawer needs to be kept intact. You will go next door this evening. The waistcoats take the whole day. You sit at the table from 9:30, when the nausea finally withdraws enough to allow you to focus, until the light fails at 4 o'clock, and then you light the tallow candle and work until 6, when Thomas comes home and you have to put everything away and be his wife for the evening. Your hands work automatically, right hand holding the button, left hand with the needle, working through the silk at regular intervals. The small, careful violence of the buttonhole, the tiny cuts, the tight binding stitches that keep the raw edge from fraying, in and pull, in and pull. The silk is gold-coloured, this particular waistcoat, and it catches what little light there is and makes the work slightly easier than the dark ones. 6 waistcoats, 18 shillings when delivered. More than a week of Thomas's wages. The money that, added to the tin box, builds slowly toward the kitchen and the extra room and the slightly different version of this life that you've been building toward since the wedding. You will not stop working. Not yet. Not for a long time, probably. Women of your class do not stop working when they are pregnant. They work until the size of it makes working difficult, and then they work anyway, and the stopping happens when the stopping can no longer be helped. Your mother worked until the week before your brother was born. You have been told this as a fact, not a warning, though perhaps it should have been both. Your back aches by 3 o'clock. This is new. A low, steady ache across the lower part of your back, just above where the waistband of your skirt sits. You shift your position in the chair, trying to redistribute the weight, and the ache doesn't leave but settles into something manageable. You keep working. The street outside is doing what streets in Clerkenwell do on a Wednesday afternoon in February. The noise of it comes through the glass in layers, the steady percussion of wheels on cobbles, the irregular percussion of hooves, the voices of vendors, the bell of some vehicle passing, the sound of children somewhere, shrill and distant. Normal noise, the city proceeding, 3 million people going about the business of Wednesday. At some point in the early afternoon, Mrs. Hartley knocks on the wall. This is their communication system. 1 knock. Is everything all right? 2 knocks. Come and have tea. 3 knocks. Emergency. 2 knocks. You sit still for a moment. Your needle pauses in the silk. Tea with Mrs. Hartley means an hour of conversation in her sitting room, which smells of the good coal she uses on her fire and the particular cleaning product she applies to her grate. It means her sitting across from you with her hands in her lap, watching you with the shrewd, kind eyes of a woman who has seen everything and classified it accurately, and asking questions in the indirect way she has. Not probing, not forward, just attentive. And it means that if you go in there and sit down, you will tell her. You know you will tell her. You have known for 11 days that when you finally do talk to someone, it will be her, and that the telling will happen with less of your intention than you think. Because Mrs. Hartley has a quality of listening that makes the truth settle into her hearing before you have consciously decided to put it there. You put the waistcoat down on the table. 2 knocks. You knock back twice. I'm coming. Her sitting room is warmer than yours. She has a better fire. Not more coal, but a better grate. One that draws properly. One that she has apparently optimized through years of management. The room smells of the coal smoke and a faint damp smell from the window that has a slightly worse seal than yours, and of something cooking in the back. Something that contains onions and salt and something savoury that is not unpleasant. Your nose notes it. Your stomach, mercifully, does not protest. Mrs. Hartley pours tea from a brown earthenware pot that has been on the hob. The cups are good. Real china, white with a blue border, the kind of thing she sets out for company. She sets these cups out for you now, as she always does, and this small courtesy, which she's been extending since your first month in the building, makes something in your chest tighten in a way that has nothing to do with your stays. "Sit down, Ellen," she says, in the tone that is neither invitation nor instruction, but some space between the two. "You look like you've been at that sewing since before God was up." "Since 9:30. Before that, I'd say." She sets the pot down and takes her own chair across from you. Her own work, darning, a large pile of it, is on the side table, but she doesn't pick it up. She's giving you her attention. She does this without making a point of it. You're looking a bit washed out. "It's February, you say?" She picks up her cup, takes a sip, looks at the fire. You have the impression of a woman deliberately not looking at you, which is different from a woman who isn't paying attention. You drink your tea. The fire crackles. Outside, the street makes its noises. Somewhere in the room beyond the closed door, Mrs. Hartley's youngest, Arthur, who is 10, and who should by rights be in school, but who has apparently been home ill this week with a chest, coughs twice in a pattern that sounds habitual rather than alarming. "How are you sleeping?" Mrs. Hartley says, still looking at the fire. "Fine," you say, which is not entirely true. "A bit disrupted." Another pause. "Are you eating?" "Yes." Also not entirely true. "Your appetite has been strange. Things you usually like have become unappealing, and the bread in the morning, which you now eat carefully and slowly before anything else, has become your most reliable food. Plain bread. Nothing on it. Nothing beside it. Nothing after it for at least 20 minutes. The technique of survival. Well enough. Mrs. Hartley sets down her cup. She looks at you directly now, and there it is. The quality you knew would arrive. The look of a woman who has already sorted the information and is waiting for you to catch up. Ellen, she says gently, when did your last course come? The directness of it, the absolute matter-of-fact directness, delivered without embarrassment, without preamble, without any of the circumlocution that the era usually requires of this kind of conversation. She simply asks. You open your mouth to say something managing, something that keeps the lid on it a little longer, and then you close your mouth, and then you say, 5 weeks ago, approximately. Mrs. Hartley nods. She doesn't say anything for a moment, and in that moment you can feel something shifting in the room, or perhaps in you, some internal rearrangement that comes with the first telling, the first time you have said this to another person, the first time the information has passed through your throat and become real in the air between you. And you've been feeling sick in the mornings? Every morning, for nearly 2 weeks. Your chest tender? You nod. You don't trust your voice. Any cramping? No. Mrs. Hartley picks up her tea again. She's quiet for another moment. Well, she says, sounds to me like you might be expecting. The words land gently. She's watching your face with the careful attention of someone monitoring weather. Yes, you say. I thought it might be that. How do you feel about it? This is not the question you expected. The question you expected was about Thomas, about when you would tell him, about what your plans were. The question about how you feel catches you slightly off guard, and for a moment you look at the fire and try to locate the answer somewhere in the warmth of it. How do you feel about it? You feel terrified. You feel something underneath the terror that is not quite joy, but is adjacent to it. Something warm and entirely involuntary that you've been trying to ignore for 11 days because it makes the terror worse somehow, makes it more specific. You feel your mother's absence more sharply than you have in years. You feel the weight of all the things you don't know, pressing down on all sides. I'm not sure yet, you say. Mrs. Hartley nods. This is the right answer. She accepts it without judgment. You'll tell Thomas? Yes, when I'm more certain. You are fairly certain, she says, not unkindly. Another week won't make you more certain. It'll just make you 6 weeks behind where you need to be. Behind at what? She puts her cup down and folds her hands in her lap and begins to tell you. This is what Mrs. Hartley tells you, sitting in her warm sitting room on a Wednesday afternoon in February 1863, while the fire crackles and Arthur coughs in the next room and the street below makes its ordinary noise. The signs you have already noticed are, in her view, reliable. The lateness of the course, the morning sickness, the tenderness. Together, these 3 things constitute, for a woman of her experience, a sufficient indication. She is not a doctor, and she is not a midwife, and she will not tell you she can be certain. But she will tell you that in 6 pregnancies she recognized this pattern each time, and she was correct each time. The morning sickness is the one I'd trust most, she says. Some women's courses go irregular from other causes. Cold, worry, bad food. But the sickness, coming every morning at the same time and lifting the same way, that's different. What causes it, you ask? Because you have been wondering this for 11 days, lying in the dark, trying to locate the mechanism. God knows, she says with cheerful frankness. The doctors have all sorts of theories. My mother said it was the body cleaning itself out to make room. My grandmother said it was the child refusing food until it was ready. Mrs. Poole on the ground floor at my old building said it was the smell of the husband that did it. She raises an eyebrow. That one I'm less sure about, though there's something to it in that you seem to notice smells more. I do, you say, slightly startled. I've been... The leather from downstairs? Yes, it does that somehow, makes the nose sharper. She considers this without apparent interest in explaining it. You learn to live with it, or it passes. Usually by 3 months it's better. 3 months. You do the calculation quietly. 3 more months of this. You look at the fire and accept this information. I should see a doctor? If you want confirmation, yes. Though I'll tell you honestly, a doctor in 1863 cannot tell you much more than I can tell you right now. And what he can tell you, he'll say very indirectly, and the examination is... She pauses, chooses her word with some care. Limited by the standards of modesty. This is interesting. What do you mean? I mean that a respectable physician examining a married woman for possible pregnancy does most of his examination without actually examining her. He asks questions, he takes her pulse, he looks at her colour, he asks about the course and the symptoms, and then, if she gives him sufficient evidence, he will say that he believes she is in an interesting condition, and recommend that she take particular care of herself and return to see him if anything changes. She says this without particular irony, but there is something in her voice. He doesn't examine her. He may perform what they call a digital examination, but he will do it with the woman fully clothed usually, or with a sheet, and he will not look at what he's doing. He does it by feel, under the skirt, and tells you the result from memory. She pauses again. Some of them are better than others. Some of them are very good, even under those circumstances. But you understand why it's not always clarifying. You understand. You sit with this for a moment. Is there any other way to be sure? Not really, not at this stage. She picks up her tea, drinks the last of it. You can wait. In 4 months, maybe 3.5 in some women, you'll feel the child move. That's what they call quickening. And that's when you know for certain, absolutely, beyond any question, when you feel it move. Quickening. You have heard this word. It has always seemed abstract to you, a technical term, something that happened to other women, to women in novels. Now it sits in your mind as something personal, something coming. 4 months, you say, roughly, sometimes a little later. She sets down the empty cup. But Ellen, you don't need to wait for that to tell Thomas. Tell him what you know now. He should know. What if I'm wrong? Mrs. Hartley looks at you for a long moment. Then you're wrong, and you tell him that too. He's your husband. That's what husbands are for. She stands up, which means the conversation is complete. Not rudely. She simply has the ability to close a conversation as cleanly as she opens one. Come back to me if you have questions, and eat more. Whatever you can get down in the morning, even if it's just bread, keep something in your stomach and the sickness is better. You stand up too. Thank you, you say. Of course. She moves toward the door to show you out. Then she stops and turns back to you, and her expression is different for just a moment. Softer, or more specifically attentive, in a way that goes past the practical. Your mother, she says, she died in childbed. Yes. You manage the word without difficulty. You've had 14 years to practice. That was from fever. You know that. It's not. The pregnancy doesn't cause the fever. The fever comes afterward, sometimes, from infection. It's much less common with a good midwife, someone who keeps things clean. When the time comes, I'll tell you who to use. She's the best in this part of the city. She meets your eyes directly. You're not going to die, Ellen. You didn't realize you needed to hear that. The tightness in your chest at this is not what you expect. Not grief exactly, but something older, relief, or maybe the first deep breath you've taken in 11 days. Thank you, you say again, and you go back to the waistcoats. Before we go any further, let's talk about what you're actually dealing with here. What Victorian women actually knew and didn't know and had access to when their bodies started sending these particular signals. Because the situation in 1863 is considerably more complicated than you might think, and more interesting, and in some ways more terrible. There is no such thing in February 1863 as a pregnancy test. The first scientifically reliable pregnancy test won't be developed for another 64 years. The Aschheim-Zondek test, 1927, involving the injection of a woman's urine into an immature mouse and observing whether it induces ovulation. Before that, nothing. Not in the modern sense. There is no diagnostic tool that can confirm pregnancy in its early stages with any kind of certainty. What there is instead is a body of knowledge, partly medical, partly folkloric, partly practical, about what early pregnancy feels like, looks like, and produces in the way of evidence. And this knowledge is held in the Victorian era primarily by women, not by doctors, by women. By the neighbour who has had 6 children, by the midwife who has attended 200 births, by the mother and the sister and the aunt, the network of female practical knowledge that runs underneath the official medical establishment like groundwater under the city, not visible, not sanctioned, but essential, the thing that keeps people alive. The official medical establishment of 1863 has its own views on pregnancy diagnosis, and they are fascinating and frequently useless and occasionally dangerous, and we will get to them. But first let's stay with the body. Your body. The primary evidence. Here is what Victorian medical literature of the 1860s called the presumptive signs of pregnancy. The first indicators, the early evidence, the things that Mrs. Hartley was asking you about in her sitting room with her direct matter-of-fact questions. First, amenorrhea, the cessation of the monthly course. This is the sign that most women, then as now, notice first, and it is the most obvious and the most discussed in the medical texts. A woman who has previously been regular and who misses her course by 2 weeks or more is considered in the medical literature of the era to be presenting a presumptive sign of pregnancy. Presumptive, not confirmatory. Because, and this is the important thing, there are many other reasons why a course might be interrupted. Illness, severe cold, malnutrition, emotional disturbance, overwork, certain diseases of the female organs that are not pregnancy. So the missed course is the alarm that gets your attention. It is not by itself proof. Second, nausea and vomiting. The medical literature of the period is extensive on this subject. Morning sickness, they call it in the popular press, though they observe, correctly, that in many women it is not limited to the morning. It may occur at any time of day, or all day, or, in severe cases, continuously. The technical term used in the medical literature is hyperemesis gravidarum for severe cases, from the Latin for excessive vomiting in pregnancy. For the ordinary version, they say nausea of the pregnant or breeding sickness, the second term being one used by women themselves, the first by the doctors. What causes it in 1863 is completely unknown. The medical men have theories. One popular theory holds that it is caused by the uterus pressing on surrounding nerves as it expands, creating a sympathetic disturbance throughout the body. Another holds that it is a systemic response to the presence of a developing organism, a kind of biological conversation between the mother's body and the new life forming within it. A third theory, popular among certain physiologists, holds that it is primarily a nervous complaint related to the heightened emotional state of the expectant woman, which is to say that it is, in part, her own fault for being overly sensitive. The women who experience it are uniformly uninterested in the theories. They care about when it stops. It typically stops for most women somewhere between the 10th and 14th week, the first trimester. After that, for most, not all, the body adjusts or the triggering mechanism changes and the mornings become survivable again. The nausea doesn't disappear completely for everyone, but the acute phase, the 7:15 and don't move, too. Fast phase generally passes. You will spend several more weeks in that phase. There's nothing to be done about it. The Victorians have no effective treatment. They recommend plain dry food in the morning before rising. Toast, preferably. Dry bread if toast isn't available. Eaten slowly, before getting up, before the body has had time to orient itself and begin its protests. Thin gruel, weak tea, arrowroot dissolved in water. Things that are nothing, as close to nothing as you can eat while still technically eating something. The smell of oranges, recommended by some practitioners, though the mechanism is unclear and the evidence anecdotal. No rich food, no spiced food, no food with strong odours. Which brings us to the third presumptive sign. Third, alterations of the senses, specifically the nose. This one is not in the 1860s well documented in the official medical literature. It is mentioned but briefly as a kind of curiosity, a footnote to the more important symptoms. But the women know about it. Mrs. Hartley knew about it. The midwife you will eventually see will know about it. The books aimed at general female readers, the domestic advice manuals, the family health publications that circulate in the middle and working classes, these books discuss it in practical terms, as something to be managed rather than explained. The pregnant woman's sense of smell becomes, in the early weeks, significantly and sometimes dramatically enhanced. Things she previously didn't notice, she now notices. Things she previously tolerated, she now cannot. Tobacco smoke, cooking meat, certain cleaning products, the smell of the husband at close quarters. This one, as Mrs. Hartley said, being a genuine phenomenon observed consistently enough that it has made it into the practical literature. Something about the pregnant body becomes sensitized, becomes a precision instrument of olfactory detection in a way that no one in 1863 can adequately explain. We know now in our century that this is almost certainly related to the hormonal upheaval of early pregnancy, specifically the rise in estrogen and progesterone, which appear to sensitize the olfactory system. We also know that this heightened sense of smell is very likely connected to the nausea, that the nausea is often triggered by smells, and that the smells that trigger it are very frequently associated with things that might be harmful to a developing fetus. Meat that could carry bacteria, certain chemicals, the metabolic byproducts of another person living in close proximity. The pregnant body is running a very elaborate early warning system, and the instrument it is using is the nose. None of this is known in 1863, but the women know the fact even without the mechanism. Fourth, breast changes. The Victorian medical texts are somewhat squeamish about this one, which means they are technically complete, but written in the most indirect language available. Enlargement and sensitization of the mammary glands, tenderness and engorgement of the anterior thoracic region. The textbooks for physicians use this language. The books for women use a tenderness of the bosom, a fullness and heaviness, sensitiveness to the touch. The advice manuals recommend loosening the stays. The doctors recommend the same, though they frame it as protecting the health of the breast tissue. What the medical texts also note, but what women know far better, is this. The nipples darken, not dramatically in the early weeks. It is a subtle change, from whatever colour they were before toward a darker shade, brownish or reddish, with the areola becoming slightly more pronounced. This is a reliable sign, not always present in the very earliest weeks, but developing consistently by the 6th or 7th week, and noticeable to a woman who is paying attention. You haven't looked. You have been, in some complicated way, deliberately not looking, standing at the washstand with the mirror, dressing and undressing with a careful economy of observation. Not because you are shy of yourself. You're a working woman. You have no patience for excessive delicacy about the body. But because looking would make the looking real. Because seeing the change would mean acknowledging the mechanism. You will look eventually. Probably tonight, in the lamplight, when Thomas is asleep, and you will see that the change is already there. Fifth, frequent urination. The Victorian texts mention this one late and briefly. A certain urgency of the bladder, one text says, with a sort of pained indirectness that tells you the author found the subject uncomfortable. Increased frequency of the waterworks is the version in the domestic manuals. The mechanism suggested the enlarging uterus pressing on the bladder. This is partially correct. It becomes more accurate later in pregnancy, when the uterus is large enough to exert genuine pressure. In the earliest weeks, the mechanism is different, hormonal rather than mechanical, but the effect is real. You need to use the chamber pot more often, and the urgency of needing to is slightly more acute than usual. This is one you've noticed and attributed to the cold, because cold makes everyone need to go more frequently. This is also a reasonable alternative explanation. This is the nature of early pregnancy symptoms in 1863. Almost all of them have reasonable alternative explanations, and the art of knowing is in recognizing when there are too many of them, occurring too consistently, with too much regularity to be coincidental. 5 weeks late. Morning sickness every day at the same time for nearly 2 weeks. The chest, the smell, the backache, the tiredness that arrives in the afternoons like a wall. Taken together, these constitute what the medical men call strong presumptive evidence. Taken together, they constitute what Mrs. Hartley calls, "You're pregnant, Ellen. Go home and tell your husband. You tell Thomas on a Thursday. He comes home at 6:30. You have made a dinner, a genuine dinner, not just bread and dripping, a dinner with meat. A small piece of mutton neck that you bought from the butcher on Exmouth Street, the one Mrs. Hartley recommends, stewed with onions and whatever was cheapest at the market. The smell of cooking it, filling the 2 rooms for the past 2 hours, has been a particular challenge for your nose, but you managed it. Keeping the window cracked, breathing through your mouth when you had to, and the result is on the table in the pot, and it smells, if you stand at a sufficient distance, actually decent. Thomas comes in and takes off his coat and hat and hangs them on the hook, He has a good face, Thomas. Ordinary in most ways. Not handsome in any dramatic sense, but well made, reliable. Dark hair, slightly thinning at the temples already, and he is only 26. Brown eyes behind the round spectacles he wears for close work. The smell of the office on him, ink and paper and the particular dusty warmth of a room full of ledgers, which you have loved since before you married him, and which this evening you notice more acutely than usual but tolerate. He sits down, and you serve the mutton, and you eat. You talk about ordinary things. He tells you about the new client at Grayson and Sons, a small manufacturer in Shoreditch who has brought in a complicated set of accounts, and who seems to believe that the accounts complication is somehow the fault of the bookkeepers, rather than his own unsystematic approach to record-keeping. He makes a face about this that is familiar and fond. He tells you that the rain on the way home caught him halfway, and he should probably look at getting his boots resoled. You tell him that the Exmouth Street butcher had good mutton this week. Then you say, "Thomas, I think I might be with child." The pot is on the table between you. The fire in the grate has burned down to embers and needs a piece of coal, which you've been putting off getting up to add. The room smells of the mutton and the coal smoke and the faint leather from below that you are, at this particular moment, not noticing. Thomas puts his fork down. He doesn't say anything immediately. He looks at you across the pot of mutton with an expression you cannot quite read. It is too many things at once for a single expression to contain, which is the honest truth of most important moments. You watch his face arrange and rearrange itself for several seconds. "Are you sure?" he says. "Not completely, but fairly sure. Mrs. Hartley thinks so." "You talked to Mrs. Hartley?" "Yesterday." A pause. "She was very sensible about it." Thomas picks up his fork, puts it down again, looks at the embers in the grate. How long? 6 weeks, maybe 7. "The nausea has been—" You stop. You look at your plate. "I've been managing it. The work is still getting done." "I'm not asking about the work." He says this quietly, without reproach. "Are you all right?" Something in your chest moves. The question catches you off guard in the same way Mrs. Hartley's question caught you off guard, and for the second time in 2 days you realise that the question you were not expecting is the question you most needed to be asked. "I think so," you say. "I'm tired. The mornings are difficult, but otherwise—" He nods slowly. He picks up his fork, puts it down again, finally abandoning the pretense that he's going to eat any more of the mutton at this moment. He takes off his glasses and pinches the bridge of his nose in the way he does when he is adding up columns that don't balance. "We'll need to see a doctor," he says. "Yes." "I'll ask Mr. Grayson tomorrow. He uses a man near the Inns of Court, Doctor someone." He puts his glasses back on. "I'll get the name. Mrs. Hartley mentioned a midwife. We can see the doctor first." He looks at you directly. There is something working in his expression, something that takes you a moment to identify, because it is unfamiliar, because you have not seen it in quite this form before. It is, you realise, fear, very specific, very contained fear, held tightly, not to alarm you. "Ellen, you'll be fine." "I know," you say. "I mean it." "So do I." You get up and put a piece of coal on the fire. The coal is in a small iron bucket beside the grate. You lift a piece with the tongs and settle it onto the embers and watch the fire work on it. The slow orange progress of ignition. Behind you, you hear Thomas pick up his fork. You sit back down. You eat the mutton. Outside, London makes its sounds in the dark. Dr. Pemberton's practice is on Chancery Lane, 4 streets from Thomas's office at Grayson and Sons, which is how Thomas knows his name and how the appointment is made for the following Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock, the earliest available time, 5 days away. You spend those 5 days in the ordinary rhythm of work and nausea and careful management and the growing sense that the thing is now in motion, that telling Thomas was the door, and once you walk through it, the events that come after are no longer avoidable. You finish the waistcoats. You deliver them to Mrs. Alderton on the Thursday, the day after telling Thomas, taking the omnibus to Regent Street and carrying the parcel under your arm, and standing in the back workroom of Mrs. Alderton's establishment, while Mrs. Alderton examines each waistcoat with the same focused, technical attention that you put into making them, and then she counts out 18 shillings, and you put them in your coat pocket and take the omnibus home. 18 shillings. You put 16 in the tin box. The remaining 2 shillings go to the butcher and the coal merchant. Mrs. Alderton notices nothing different about you. Why would she? You look the same as always. The tightening of the stays is hidden under the coat. The face is the same face. The hands are the same hands, doing the same work at the same standard. This is one of the strange things about these early weeks. You are invisible in your change. The world goes on treating you as the person you were before. Because to the world you're still that person. You have the same appearance and the same voice and the same capacity for doing the things expected of you. It is only in the private space of your own experience, in the mornings, in the afternoons when the fatigue arrives, in the evenings when your back aches and you sit by the fire trying to find a position that doesn't, that the change is present and legible and real. You wonder sometimes in these 5 days how long this invisibility lasts, how long before it becomes visible, before the dress doesn't button, before the posture shifts, before the shape of you tells everyone on the street what is happening before you've chosen to say it. 4 months, probably, maybe slightly less for a slight woman. By July you will be unable to conceal it. The stays will have to be let out, then eventually abandoned. Your working dresses will need to be altered. The trajectory of your body will become its own announcement, but that is 4 months away. For now you are invisible, and the invisibility feels, in some way you do not entirely understand, like a resource, a finite one. Now, let me tell you what seeing a Victorian doctor for a potential pregnancy actually involves, because it is not what you might expect, and it is one of the more revealing windows into the peculiarity of Victorian medical culture. Dr. Pemberton's consulting room is on the ground floor of a terraced house on Chancery Lane. You and Thomas sit in the waiting room for 20 minutes before being shown in. The waiting room has 4 chairs with wooden arms and a small table, with a copy of the Illustrated London News from 3 weeks ago, and a palm plant in a brass pot. It smells of coal and the particular antiseptic quality of a room that is cleaned frequently and with intention. Another woman waits across from you, older, alone, looking at the middle distance with the expression of someone rehearsing what they are going to say. "Thomas is with you," Thomas insisted. "This is normal practice. A married woman attending a doctor for this purpose brings her husband both as social convention and as practical necessity, because many of the questions the doctor will ask are questions about the marital situation, and the doctor may well prefer to address certain parts of his consultation to the husband rather than the wife. This is not unusual. This is the medical convention of the era. Dr. Pemberton is about 50, a solidly built man with the kind of grey side whiskers that men of his generation and profession all seem to develop, as if the whiskers are part of the qualification. He has clean hands. You notice this immediately, and it is relevant, because the hand-washing movement, sparked by Ignaz Semmelweis in the 1840s, is still working its way through British medicine, and not all doctors have adopted it with equal enthusiasm. Dr. Pemberton's hands are clean, and the room is clean, and these are good signs. He takes you through the consultation with professional efficiency. He asks about the course, when it was last regular, how late it currently is. He asks about the symptoms, listing them in a manner that suggests he's checking them against a mental catalogue. The nausea, the tenderness, the fatigue. He asks about your general health, your diet, whether you've had any illness recently, whether there is a family history of, and here he is delicate, of difficulties in confinement. You tell him about your mother. He writes this down in a small notebook with a pen. He takes your pulse. He examines your complexion and your eyes, the whites of them, looking for signs of anemia or other systemic issues. He presses gently on your abdomen through your clothing, which tells him almost nothing at 6 or 7 weeks, but which he does with an expression of concentration that suggests he is gathering information regardless. Then he asks you to lie on the examination table. This is the most uncomfortable part. Not physically. The table is padded, covered in oilcloth, and Dr. Pemberton is quick and efficient. The discomfort is social. You lie there, fully clothed, with a sheet arranged over your lower half, and Dr. Pemberton performs what he calls a bimanual examination. One hand on the outside of the abdomen, one hand, gloved, cold, inserted briefly beneath the sheet, and you look at the ceiling with its small crack running from the window toward the centre, and you breathe, and it is over in approximately 90 seconds. The purpose of the examination is to palpate the uterus, to feel its size and position and firmness through the walls of the abdomen and the vaginal vault simultaneously. A trained physician can determine, by this method, whether the uterus is enlarged to a degree consistent with early pregnancy, whether it has begun to soften in the particular way that early pregnancy produces, a softening of the cervix and lower uterine segment that doctors of this era call Higar's sign, after the German gynecologist who described it, though the sign is not yet widely established in British practice in 1863. Dr. Pemberton, when you're sitting upright again, and he is at his desk again and Thomas is beside you, says, "Mrs. Marsh, the examination is consistent with your being in the early stages of pregnancy. I would estimate, based on the size of the uterus and the duration of the symptoms, that you are approximately 6 to 7 weeks along. This is, of course, a preliminary assessment. As the pregnancy advances, the signs will become more definitive." He says this to a point slightly to the left of your head, not quite to you and not quite to Thomas, to the room, perhaps, to the midpoint of respectable Victorian medicine. "Is everything," Thomas begins. "Everything appears normal at this stage, yes. No cause for alarm. Mrs. Marsh should continue to rest adequately, eat well, particularly iron-rich foods, which I will note down for you, and avoid exertion. She should not lace her stays too tightly." He looks, for the first time, directly at you. "This is important, Mrs. Marsh. The stays must be loosened. The pressure on the abdomen must be reduced. This is not a recommendation, but a requirement." "Yes," you say. "Good. I would like to see you again in 6 weeks. By that time, the signs will be substantially more developed. You should expect the nausea to begin improving within the next month. If it does not, or if it becomes severe, you must send for me." He closes the notebook. "Do you have any questions?" Thomas asks about the diet. The doctor writes down a list. beef, liver, spinach if available, dark green vegetables generally, milk. He asks about exercise and is told that moderate walking is beneficial. He asks about, you can see him choosing the words carefully, about marital relations, and the doctor says with the same sealing addressing voice that abstinence is generally recommended in the first 3 months, after which the question can be revisited. Thomas goes slightly pink. You do not. You are thinking about the word normal. Everything appears normal at this stage. This small word offered without drama or special emphasis, that nevertheless settles into you like ballast, like something to stand on. You walk out of Dr. Pemberton's consulting room on Chancery Lane into the cold February air, and Thomas takes your arm without being asked, which is something he does not usually do in the street, being a man with a certain reserve about public demonstrations of anything. You walk the first block in silence. The street is busy. It is always busy here. So close to the Inns of Court and the law offices and the counting houses, men in black coats moving purposefully in all directions, the thoroughfare clogged with cabs and omnibuses, and a delivery cart that has apparently become fixed in place and is causing everyone else to detour around it with varying degrees of equanimity. "Well," Thomas says. "Well," you say, "another half a block. Are you all right?" "Fine." You are actually fine. The nausea is holding off. You ate the dry bread carefully before leaving this morning, and the cold air is helping, and the business of negotiating the Chancery Lane pavement requires enough attention that your stomach has decided to cooperate for the moment. Are you? A pause. You can feel him processing. Thomas processes things by going quiet. Not a troubled quiet, but a working quiet. The quiet of a man going through columns. "I think so," he says. Then, more specifically, "I keep thinking about money." "I know." Not in an alarmed way, just reckoning. "The tin box, you say?" "Yes." The tin box in the bottom drawer. The beginning money. Which is now, you both understand without having to say it, the baby money. The thing it was for has changed, but it is the same box and the same money and the same future, only differently shaped. There's £2, 9 shillings in it, you say, as of yesterday. Right. He's computing. You know the face, the slight abstraction. The eyes going to the middle distance while the mind does something private and numerical. And you've got the sewing, and I'll speak to Mr. Grayson about the junior clerk position. Howell's leaving in March. Thomas. It's 1.6 more a week if I get it. Thomas. Stop adding for a moment. He stops. He looks at you sideways, the round glasses catching the grey light. Sorry. Don't apologise. Just walk with me for a moment. You walk with him for a moment. The street narrows and then opens again where it meets a small square. Not a grand square, nothing like the ones in the West End. Just the ordinary urban breathing space of a few bare plane trees and a bench and a drinking trough for horses at which 2 horses are currently drinking, with the deep seriousness that horses bring to everything. You stop and watch them for a moment because there is something steadying about it, about the big patient animal heads bending to the trough and the sound of drinking. "I'm all right," you say again, "and you're going to be all right. And we have £2, 9 shillings, and you have your wage, and I have the sewing, and we have Mrs. Hartley next door who knows everything, and Dr. Pemberton said everything is normal." It did help that he said that, Thomas admits. Yes. You turn back toward the street, the direction of home. Come on, you'll be late. He is late. He goes. You take the omnibus back to Rosebery Avenue alone, sitting on the inside bench with the city going past the windows. The the familiar sequence of streets, the landmarks you've learned in 7 months, the pub on the corner and the fire station and the shop that sells second-hand furniture piled up against its own windows. And you hold what you know on the way home the way you might hold something fragile, carefully, with both hands, not squeezing. Normal. 6 to 7 weeks. The nausea should improve in a month. All right. Here is something that the official medical visit does not tell you, that Dr. Pemberton does not mention. That is not in the notebook he writes the iron-rich foods into, what the next 7.5 months are actually going to feel like. Not medically, physically, in the specific and unglamorous detail of living in a body that is reorganizing itself from the inside out, in 2 rooms above a cobbler's shop, while continuing to sew other people's waistcoats, and cook Thomas's supper, and manage 6 shillings a week, and grow a person simultaneously. This is the knowledge that passes between women, not in doctors' consulting rooms, not in the pages of household management or the medical textbooks, in kitchens and on landings and over backyard fences and in the low-voiced conversations of women sitting together while their hands are busy with something else, the mending, the vegetables, the laundry, the knowledge that has no official channel and no institutional home, and that is nevertheless absolutely essential. Mrs. Hartley gives you most of it in the weeks that follow, not all at once. She's not the kind of woman who overwhelms. She gives it the way good coal burns, steadily, sustainably, in the right amount for the situation. She tells you about the tiredness first, not because it is the most important thing, but because it is the thing you are asking about without asking. The thing visible in the dark circles under your eyes and the slight heaviness of your movements when she sees you on the landing in the mornings. It passes, she says, mostly. Between 3 and 4 months it gets better. Your body's been busy making everything. She gestures vaguely toward her own midsection, encompassing whatever everything means in this context. The blood supply, all of it, takes more energy than you'd think. The tiredness is your body telling you it's doing the work. It's difficult with the sewing, you say. I know. Do what you can. Don't push yourself past what you can actually manage. A pause. You can sleep in the afternoons? Thomas comes home at 6:30. Before 6:30 then, an hour. Put the sewing down and sleep. The work will still be there. You are not, as a rule, a woman who sleeps in the afternoons. You regard afternoon sleeping as something that happens to invalids and the elderly and people of leisure, none of which you are. But you try it once, in the 2nd week after the doctor's visit, putting the needlework aside at 2:00 and lying down on the bed fully clothed and waking up at 3:15, with the grey afternoon light in your eyes and your hands unclenched and the tiredness, for a brief window of time, actually gone. You do it every day after that, without guilt. Mrs. Hartley tells you about the food, not what to eat. Dr. Pemberton covered that, and his list is sensible if not entirely affordable. But how to eat? When and in what quantities? And with what strategy? Little and often, she says. Don't let your stomach get empty. That's when the sickness is worst, when there's nothing in there. Keep something in it all the time, even if it's just a biscuit, a piece of bread. Something. This is not advice you will find in Dr. Pemberton's notebook. It is the kind of advice that comes from having experienced the thing being advised upon, from having been in that body, in that particular morning dark time, feeling that particular rolling emptiness in the stomach that precedes the wave, and having discovered through trial and error that the bread, taken early, taken before movement, taken before the body has fully committed to its morning program of protest makes it survivable. You keep a piece of bread on the nightstand. Every evening you cut a piece and put it there, and every morning you eat it before you sit up, lying on your side in the dark, chewing slowly and carefully, giving it time to settle. And then you wait, and then you sit up, and then you put your feet on the cold floor. The nausea does not disappear, but it is managed. And managing is what this period of your life is about. The careful, daily, uncelebrated management of a body that is doing something enormous in plain sight of no one. Let's talk about the stays, because this is a story about the Victorian female body, and the stays are not a minor detail. They are a central architectural fact of your daily existence, and what pregnancy does to that architecture is instructive about the gap between what the official culture expects of women's bodies and what women's bodies are actually doing. You wear stays, of course you do. Every woman of your era and class wears stays, has worn them since childhood, and the stays are not, for most women, the instruments of torture that later generations will claim. They are not tight-laced. That is something different. A fashion among a particular kind of fashionable woman that has nothing to do with your life. Your stays are moderately structured, long enough to cover your hips, built to provide the smooth, controlled silhouette that the decade's fashion requires and that your working dress presupposes. They're made of cotton coutil stiffened with bone, actual bone, from whale or cow depending on the price, and they fasten down the front with a busk, a long flat piece of bone or steel, and lace up the back. You have been wearing stays since you were 12 years old. You put them on in the morning without thinking about them, the way you put on your shoes. They are simply part of being dressed, except that now they are becoming, week by week, an active problem. Dr. Pemberton said to loosen them. Mrs. Hartley said the same thing before the doctor with less ceremony, and you have been doing this, loosening the front hooks by one and then by two, adjusting the back lacing until there is room to breathe properly, until the pressure across your ribs and midsection is not pressing on anything that needs to expand. But there is a limit to how much adjustment is possible before the stays simply don't fit anymore, before they are working against your body rather than with it. This is one of the areas where Victorian medicine and Victorian fashion are in direct conflict, and it is the women who are caught in the middle. The medical view by 1863 is reasonably clear. Tight stays during pregnancy are dangerous, not mildly inadvisable. Dangerous. There is documented evidence in the obstetrical literature, in the case records of physicians who attend difficult labours, of complications attributed to stays that were laced too tightly for too long. The growing uterus needs room to expand upward into the abdominal cavity. The organs need room to shift, to accommodate the presence of the developing child. Stays that prevent this movement can cause, in the worst cases, fetal malpresentation, early labour, miscarriage. In less severe cases, they cause chronic discomfort, impaired circulation, difficulty breathing, backache, edema. They cause, in short, a great deal of what Victorian medicine typically classifies as female nervous complaints and treats with iron tonic and rest. The social view is different. The social view is that a woman who is visibly pregnant in public is a woman who is making her body's intimate functions the public's business, which is not respectable. Pregnancy should be concealed for as long as possible. Women of your era speak of showing as a kind of failure, a moment when the concealment stops being effective, when the body forces acknowledgement whether or not the woman is ready to provide it. Stays that are adequately loosened to accommodate a growing belly will, by around the 4th month, be unable to conceal that growth. So women wear their stays too tightly for too long, trying to maintain the silhouette that social convention requires, and the medical men write case histories about it, and the women deal with the consequences. You have a third consideration that the medical men don't account for and the social conventions ignore. You are a working seamstress. You sit at a table for 6 to 8 hours a day. Tight stays are not just uncomfortable for a pregnant working woman sitting bent forward over fine sewing. They are, after a certain point, genuinely incompatible with the task. The pressure across the midriff, the restriction of the breath, the way the boning digs in when you lean forward, all of this compounds over the course of a working day, until by evening you are unhooking the front busk with something very close to relief. Mrs. Hartley solves this problem for you in the 6th week after the doctor's visit. She knocks on the wall one afternoon, 2 knocks, come for tea, and when you go in, she has a garment folded on the table that she presents to you with the same matter-of-fact practicality she brings to everything. It is a kind of loose corset, not structured like your regular stays, but more like a supportive band, with wide bands of sturdy cotton and fewer bones, designed to provide support at the back without restriction at the front, with ties that can be adjusted as the belly grows. I made it for my 3rd, she says, or rather, my neighbour at the time made it for me and I made it for myself afterward, and then made one for the other woman 2 doors down, and she made one for someone else. They go around. You put it on. It is not fashionable. It is not doing what stays are supposed to do. It will not produce the smooth silhouette that the decade requires, but it supports your back, which is beginning to ache in the mornings in a way that makes the sewing difficult, and it doesn't press on the front, and by the time you've walked back to your own rooms you have decided that fashion is, at the present moment, the lesser consideration. You begin wearing it every day, alternating with the regular stays on days when you need to go out, to the market, to deliver the finished work to Mrs. Alderton, and the nursing corset, as Mrs. Hartley calls it, for the working days at home. Thomas doesn't ask about it. Either he doesn't notice the difference. Possible, given that the clothing of women in 1863 presents itself as a complete, unified surface with no invitation for close inquiry. Or he notices and understands and says nothing, which is also possible. Thomas is good at that. At seeing things and leaving them alone until the moment when saying something would be useful rather than intrusive. 8 weeks now. The nausea is still present in the mornings, but, as Mrs. Hartley predicted, slightly less severe. Not gone. It will not be gone for several more weeks, but reduced in altitude, if you can speak of nausea that way. The sharp spikes of the 1st month have flattened into something more consistent and lower, a background presence that you've learned to manage rather than weather. Your nose remains, however, extraordinary. This is the thing you did not expect to persist for so long, and the thing that, in some private way, amuses you the most, because it is absurd, this transformation of your olfactory system into what seems like a precision scientific instrument, and absurdity has always seemed to you like the most available response to the things you cannot change. You can smell Mr. Finch's leather from the front room now. Before, it was only in the back room, only in the mornings. Now it is everywhere. You can smell it when you open the front door, a wave of it rising from the stairs. You can smell it when the morning post arrives. The letter comes through the slot in the door and carries the ghost of the building with it. You can smell Thomas's pipe from the next room, through a closed door, and you have had to. gently, carefully, framing it as a preference rather than a complaint. Mention that you would prefer he smoke it outside or at the window in the evenings. Thomas has adapted without making a point of adapting, which is one of the things about him that makes the marriage workable. You can smell the family downstairs in ways that no one should be able to smell another family. The cabbage, yes, always the cabbage, but also the particular soap they use for washing, the coal from their fire, the smell of children that is warm and slightly unwashed and not unpleasant exactly, just extremely present. Mrs. Finch, the wife downstairs, not the cobbler, is a stout, cheerful woman who nods to you on the stairs and sometimes offers a piece of whatever she's been baking, which you have taken to accepting because refusing is difficult and the smell has already reached you before she offers it and your stomach has already formed an opinion. What the nose is doing, you will not know in 1863, is performing a function that the doctors of your era cannot explain and do not entirely credit. The enhanced olfaction of pregnancy is observed, mentioned in the medical literature, noted in the advice manuals, but its purpose is mysterious in this century. Some doctors suggest it is connected to the same nervous sensitivity they attribute to morning sickness, a general heightening of sensory experience resulting from the physiological changes of early pregnancy. Some suggest it is simply an artifact of the increased blood supply to the nasal mucosa, which is factually accurate as far as it goes. What they don't know is this. The pregnant body, in the first trimester especially, is running an extremely conservative security protocol. The developing organism is at its most vulnerable. The immune system is suppressed. It has to be, because without suppression it would attack the fetus as foreign material. This suppression makes the pregnant woman potentially more vulnerable to certain pathogens, and so the body compensates, or attempts to compensate, by making her extraordinarily sensitive to olfactory cues that have historically been associated with pathogens, rotting food, certain chemicals, the metabolic byproducts of illness or fermentation, the hormonal profiles of other people. The nose becomes a warning system because the other defences are lowered. This is not known in 1863. It will not be properly understood for another 100 years, but the women know the fact, in the way that women who live in their bodies know things. You become very sensitive to smells when you're pregnant. You learn to manage this. You open windows. You breathe through your mouth when passing certain things. You move the tallow candle. You ask Thomas to smoke at the window. You adapt. This is what the period requires of you. Not heroism, nothing dramatic. Just the daily, uncelebrated work of adaptation, the endless management of a body that is doing something your era does not quite have language for and for which it has essentially no institutional support. The question of certainty is an interesting one, and it is worth staying with for a moment, because it illuminates something specific about the Victorian experience of early pregnancy that is different from ours. In our century, the certainty arrives early and is categorical. The test says yes or no. The hormone is present or it isn't. You know with high reliability before you've missed more than one period. And this certainty, this early, clear, confirmed knowledge, shapes everything that comes after. The appointments begin. The books are bought. The due date is calculated to the day. The first trimester, with its associated risks, is navigated with the knowledge of what it is. In 1863, you are in a different epistemological situation. You are fairly certain. Mrs. Hartley is fairly certain. Dr. Pemberton says the examination is consistent with early pregnancy, which is not the same as you are pregnant, because Dr. Pemberton cannot be certain either, not at 6 or 7 weeks. The uterus at 6 weeks is approximately the size of a plum, and while the bimanual examination can detect this enlargement and the associated softening, it is not infallible. It requires an experienced examiner, conditions that are not always easy to achieve given the modesty conventions of the era, and the absence of other conditions that might mimic the same changes. So, you live, for the first 12 weeks or so, in a state that is not uncertainty exactly. You are far beyond uncertainty, but is not certainty either. It is something like strong belief, the belief of a woman whose body has been sending consistent, specific, unmistakable signals for weeks. But belief, not certainty. This certainty, the official, physical, unambiguous certainty, will not come until much later. And there are 2 kinds of later certainty in 1863, and they are worth understanding. The first is the medical confirmation that comes as the pregnancy advances. By around 12 to 14 weeks, the uterus has grown large enough that an experienced practitioner can feel it above the pubic bone through the abdominal wall, can palpate it, determine its size, assess its growth. This is more reliable than the early examination, and it is accompanied by other signs that become more definitive. The baby's heartbeat, which can sometimes be heard through a stethoscope pressed to the abdomen from around 20 weeks, though not reliably earlier. The changes in the abdomen itself, the linea nigra, the dark line that appears on the skin of the belly from navel downward, the result of hormonal changes, the darkening of the areola, which has already begun but becomes more pronounced, the visible enlargement that eventually makes the whole question academic. But the second kind of certainty, the one that Victorian women themselves regard as the definitive confirmation, the proof that supersedes all other signs, is something that the doctors count as a sign and the women experience as a revelation. It is quickening, the first movement, the first time you feel the child move inside you. This will happen for you, for Ellen Marsh of Rosebery Avenue, Clerkenwell, at approximately 18 weeks, around the middle of June, if you're doing the arithmetic, which Thomas has already done, carefully in his neat bookkeeper's hand on a page in his small work notebook. Your due date, by Thomas's reckoning, is approximately the 15th of October. It is the beginning of March now. October is as far away as another country. But quickening. Let's stay with quickening for a moment, because it is, in 1863, in this era, in this specific cultural context, something more than a physical event. In the older legal tradition of England, which has been on the books since at least the 13th century, quickening is the point at which the developing child is considered to acquire its soul, or to become, in the legal phrase, a living person. Before quickening, the termination of a pregnancy is not, in English common law, murder. It is a lesser offence, or in some framings no offence at all. After quickening, the calculus changes. The child has moved. The child is legally and theologically alive. This tradition is already being eroded by the medical science of the 1860s. The medical men argue correctly that the developing organism does not acquire motion at quickening, only the capacity to make movements that the mother can feel, and that there is nothing biologically special about this moment compared to the weeks before it. The Offences Against the Person Act of 1861, passed 2 years before, where you currently stand in the timeline, makes abortion illegal at all stages of pregnancy, which is the beginning of the end of the legal distinction between before and after quickening. But the cultural and experiential weight of the moment has not caught up with the law. For women in 1863, quickening is still the moment, the confirmation, the thing that makes it real in a way that missed periods and morning sickness and the doctor's hedged language cannot make it real. You are waiting for it, without quite knowing you are waiting for it. In the middle nights, lying on your back when the backache gets bad, with your hands resting on the small, still not visible to others curve that is beginning to develop in your lower abdomen, you are listening, not with your ears, with something older than ears. But before we get to June, there are 4 months of ordinary living to get through. And ordinary living in early Victorian London is not a small thing. March arrives, and the cold persists, the kind of London cold that is not dramatic, not snow, not ice, just grey and damp and penetrating, the kind that gets into the rooms through the window seams and lives there, against the baseboard, at the back of the wardrobe where the coat hangs. The fire does its best. You do yours. The sewing continues. You have moved from the waistcoats to a different commission from Mrs. Alderton. 12 pairs of gentlemen's cuffs, white lawn, the kind of fine work that requires good light and a very sharp needle, and the ability to keep your hands warm enough that the fingers are flexible. The work is finer than the waistcoats, but the pay is slightly less. 14 shillings for the 12 pairs. You calculate, as you always do, the hours against the shillings, the needle per inch against the time per piece, the cost of the needle and thread against the margin, the arithmetic of the piece worker. Your hands in March are a problem. They have always been sensitive to cold. In winter, your knuckles crack, and the skin along the sides of your fingers gets rough and dry and catches the thread in ways it shouldn't. Now, with the pregnancy, there is something additional happening. Your hands are slightly swollen in the mornings, in the small joints of the fingers, so that for the first 2 hours of the day they are stiff in a way they weren't before. Not painfully stiff. Just less precise than usual, less responsive. You deal with this by keeping your hands over the fire in the mornings, holding them close to the grate in the intervals between boiling the kettle and drinking the tea and eating the bread, letting the warmth work its way into the joints before you pick up the needle. It takes 20 minutes. You build this into the morning schedule. The body keeps presenting new negotiations, and you keep finding the terms. There is a woman in the building you've not yet spoken to about any of this. Mrs. Price, who lives in the back room on the first floor with her husband and her mother-in-law, and 3 children in 2 rooms, an arrangement that taxes the building's already insufficient plumbing and creates a particular acoustic complexity on the lower floors. Mrs. Price is pregnant too. This you know because Mrs. Hartley told you, in one of her landing-base communications, said it with a kind of calm economy. Mrs. Price is in the same way. 3rd one. She's further along than you. Perhaps 5 months by now. 5 months. You look at Mrs. Price on the stairs occasionally now, seeing her with new eyes, the particular way she moves, the hand that goes automatically to the small of her back when she'd been standing too long, the slightly modified gait that pregnancy eventually produces in all women. She doesn't know you're watching with this specific attention. She's simply walking up the stairs with a coal scuttle. But you are reading her like a text about what is coming. Now let's talk about the folk knowledge. Because Mrs. Hartley and Dr. Pemberton are not, in March of 1863, the whole of the available information. There is another world of pregnancy knowledge, older and less official, that circulates in your neighbourhood and your class and your era, and it is worth understanding because it tells you something important about how women actually navigated the uncertainty of these months. The herbalist on Exmouth Street, the one 2 doors down from the butcher, with the window full of dried things in paper packets, and the smell that hits you from the pavement, knows about pregnancy. She knows about it in the way that herbalists have known about it for centuries. The herbs that support it, the herbs that threaten it, the preparations that were used before anyone had any other options, and the preparations that still circulate quietly in the back conversation of women who know. You don't go to the herbalist. Your situation doesn't require it. You are a married woman whose pregnancy is wanted, or at least accepted, or at least not the kind of emergency that sends a woman to the herbalist on Exmouth Street with a specific purpose in mind. But you know about her, the way you know about the gin shop and the pawnbroker. Not places you go, but places that exist in the mental map of the neighbourhood as points of resource for when ordinary options are exhausted. There are also the tests, the unofficial, unscientific, completely unreliable but surprisingly persistent test for pregnancy that Victorian women passed among themselves with more or less the same confidence they passed any other piece of practical knowledge. The urine test is the oldest one, not the modern urine pregnancy test, nothing like that. That won't exist for 60 years. The traditional urine test goes back centuries to the piss prophets of the medieval period, who claimed to be able to determine pregnancy and a dozen other conditions by examining urine for colour, clarity and consistency. The Victorian version has been updated by contact with more recent chemistry, but the basic principle is the same. Examine the urine for signs. Some practitioners claim that the urine of a pregnant woman, if left to stand, will show a kind of white cloud or sediment within 24 hours. Others claim that if you dip a clean iron nail into the morning urine and let it sit, it will rust differently depending on whether the woman is pregnant. These tests have no biological validity. The sediment test is looking at normal urinary protein concentrations, which are affected by 100 factors unrelated to pregnancy. The iron test is basically a rust test that has nothing to do with hormones. They do not work, and yet women perform them, not because they are credulous or foolish. You're not by any stretch foolish, but because the pressure of not knowing is such that any action that feels like knowing is a relief, even a fictional one. The test gives you something to do with the uncertainty, somewhere to put it for an evening, while you wait to see what the nail looks like in the morning. You do not perform the nail test. You know what Mrs. Hartley would say if you told her you'd done the nail test. You know it in advance, and it keeps you honest. There is another test, one with more actual physical basis, though still not reliable in any modern sense, that involves the pulse. The claim is that a pregnant woman's pulse, taken at the wrist, has a quality that an experienced practitioner can detect. That it is fuller or more bounding, or has a particular quality of rhythm. This is not entirely nonsense. The heart rate does increase in pregnancy by around 10 to 15 beats per minute, beginning in the first trimester and peaking somewhere in the second and third. The cardiac output increases by 40%. There are real changes happening in the cardiovascular system. Whether these changes are detectable as a specific pregnancy pulse by feeling the radial artery is another question, and the answer is probably no, not reliably, not in the way that was claimed. But the observation that something happens to the pulse has a real basis, even if the interpretation of it is unreliable. Dr. Pemberton took your pulse. He noted it was somewhat elevated, He wrote this down. He did not make too much of it. Mrs. Hartley, when you mention this afterward, nods. Yes. Your heart works harder. You'll notice it. Climbing stairs. You have already noticed it. The stairs from the street to your floor, 2 flights, not steep, not many, have begun to require slightly more of you than they did. Not a lot more, enough to notice, enough to tell you that the machinery is running differently now, that the normal baseline has shifted, that the thing your body is doing is not nothing. It is not nothing. It is, in fact, the most resource-intensive thing a human body can do, and it is doing it continuously, without pause, using you as both the workshop and the material. You are building a person from nothing, using only food and air and sleep and the 32 shillings a month that come into the household, and the careful management of everything. When you think about it directly, which you mostly don't because the direct thought is somewhat staggering, it seems like an extraordinary thing. Like building a cathedral. Like the men who put up St. Paul's, your St. Paul's, the Wren one, the one you can see from the higher ground to the north if the smoke is light enough, except that you are doing it in your own body, quietly, without scaffolding, without anyone being able to see the work. April. Your body has changed enough that you're aware of it every time you get dressed. Not so much that it is visible yet. You're still wearing the work dress with the 2-hook adjustment to the stays, still maintaining the approximation of your ordinary silhouette, but enough that you know. The belly is not yet a belly exactly, not in the sense of being obviously rounded, but there is something there. A firmness in the lower abdomen that wasn't there before, a density, as if the ordinarily soft lower half of your torso has been very gradually filled with something that has its own presence, that occupies space with a definiteness distinct from ordinary flesh. You find your hands going there. This is new. You'll be sitting at the table sewing and realize that your left hand, the one not holding the needle, is resting on your lower abdomen, not doing anything, just resting, as if monitoring, as if checking. You move the hand back to the table, then 10 minutes later, it is there again. Mrs. Hartley says this is normal. She says it as if it is completely obvious, and perhaps it is. You're keeping track, she says simply. Your hands know. Your hands know. Your hands are tracking the slow progress of a thing you cannot see, monitoring through touch the growth of something that has no other way of making itself known to you yet. In the absence of any external confirmation, no scans, no photographs, no measurements taken with reliable instruments, your hands are doing the work of knowing. You let them. April also brings the warmer weather, or the suggestion of warmer weather. London. April, which is not reliably warm, but which at least occasionally permits the thought of warmth. The days when you can leave the window open for an hour without the room going cold, when the air coming in from the street smells of something other than coal smoke, when the plane trees on the square at the end of the road begin to show the smallest possible gestures toward green. You're more comfortable in the warmer air. The nausea has decreased. It has not entirely gone, but the acute phase is done, the every morning at 7:15 phase. What remains is more intermittent, triggered now more by specific things. The leather is still an issue. Certain foods are still unwelcome. The smell of the tallow candle has never fully made peace with you, then by the time of day. Your appetite has changed. In the first months, food was complicated. Things you liked had become unappealing. The smell of cooking meat had required strategic management. Plain things were the only reliable things. Now the appetite is returning, but differently. Not a return to what it was before. Something new, specific, sometimes inexplicable preferences, strong enough to feel like a different personality's preferences. You want, very particularly with a specificity that embarrasses you slightly, pickled onions, not occasionally, constantly. The small pickled onions from the barrel at the grocery, the ones in the vinegary brine. You could eat them by the spoonful, and several evenings you more or less do, sitting by the fire with the jar, and Thomas looks at you across the room with an expression that contains both amusement and a sincere lack of judgment. "You're going to tell me that's normal," he says. "Mrs. Hartley says it's extremely normal." Mrs. Hartley, he says with great respect, appears to have an opinion on everything. She's earned the right. The food cravings. This is the technical term for what you're experiencing, though in 1863 the medical literature describes it variously as the longings, the peculiar appetites, or the picker of pregnancy. This last term from the Latin name of the magpie, which was believed to eat everything indiscriminately. The idea that pregnant women develop strong desires for specific, often unusual foods is ancient and universal. Every culture has its version of the pickle story, the clay story, the coal story, the ice story. The medical establishment of 1863 regards it as a real phenomenon, observable in a majority of pregnant women, and explains it variously as a signal from the developing organism about its dietary needs, a response to nutritional deficiencies being corrected by instinct, a form of sympathetic nervous excitement related to the general heightened state of the pregnant woman's system. What it actually is, we know this now, though the mechanism isn't completely understood even in our century, appears to be a complex interaction between hormonal changes, altered taste perception, and possibly the same olfactory sensitization that drives the aversions. The pregnant body doesn't just become more sensitive to smells it dislikes. It becomes more sensitive, full stop. And for some foods, the ones that happen to contain minerals or compounds that the developing organism specifically needs, this sensitivity translates into desire. The pickled onion, with its acetic acid and its sodium, its satisfying sharp saltiness. This may be your body requesting something specific, or it may be entirely random. Nobody in 1863 can tell you which. You eat the pickled onions, you continue to eat the bread in the mornings and the iron-rich foods from Dr. Pemberton's list, and the ordinary supper that you make for Thomas every evening, the beef and the vegetables and occasionally the mutton, when the week has gone well enough to allow it. You continue to sew. The cuffs are done, and a new commission has arrived from Mrs. Alderton. 5 ladies' bodices, the kind of intricate close work that will take most of the month. You're glad of the work, not just for the money, though the money is, as ever, the ground everything stands on, but for the occupation, for the thing your hands know how to do, the place your attention can go. That is not the ongoing background hum of the body's project. Work is, in the Victorian understanding of your class, not just income. It is identity, rhythm, structure, the shape of the days. You were raised in it, the sewing, the careful economy of time and thread, the knowledge that the work not done is the day gone wrong. You cannot imagine not working. You will not stop until you have to, and you will start again as soon as you can after. This is the reality that the domestic advice manuals, with their recommendations of rest and quiet occupations and fresh air, almost entirely fail to address. For a working-class woman in 1863, rest is not a recommendation you can implement. Rest costs money. Rest costs finished commissions. Rest costs Mrs. Alderton's goodwill, which is worth approximately as much as 6 months of finished waistcoats, and you cannot afford to squander it. You sew. You manage the morning nausea and the afternoon tiredness and the backache and the occasional days when the work feels harder than usual and the light is bad and the needle keeps slipping and you just have to put it down for an hour and go next door to Mrs. Hartley for tea and human company and then pick it back up again. May. At the beginning of May, you go back to see Dr. Pemberton. This is the 6-week appointment he scheduled at the end of February, though it is in fact 7 weeks since you last saw him, not 6, because the appointment had to be rescheduled when Thomas couldn't get away from the office on the original date. You go alone this time. Thomas has the junior clerk position. Mr. Grayson offered it in March. The additional shilling and sixpence a week representing a genuine and not small improvement. And the new responsibilities mean he cannot leave the office for a morning appointment. You go alone, which is slightly unusual for a woman of your class going to a doctor, but not impossible, and Dr. Pemberton receives you without comment. He examines you again. This time the examination is less medically hedged. The pregnancy is now approximately 14 weeks along, and at 14 weeks the uterus is large enough that it is rising above the pubic bone into the lower abdomen, palpable through the abdominal wall, unmistakable in its character. Well advanced and proceeding normally, Dr. Pemberton says, writing in his notebook. He asks about the nausea. You report that it is significantly improved, and about your diet and your general health. He asks whether you have experienced any bleeding. You have not. He nods, writing this down too. Any unusual discharge? You have not. He nods again. The pregnancy is progressing as expected, Mrs. Marsh. I am satisfied that the development is normal and the mother's condition is satisfactory. He puts down the pen. You should expect, sometime in the next 4 to 6 weeks, more likely 5 or 6, to become aware of movement. If you notice it, it is nothing to be alarmed about. It is simply the child. Simply the child. You walk home from Chancery Lane in May sunshine, the first real sunshine of the year, and the city around you is doing what it does in May sunshine, expanding, exhaling. The curtained windows opened, the street vendors' voices carrying further in the warm air, the plane trees actually green now, the horses somehow more relaxed, the whole mechanism of 3 million people slightly eased, and you walk through it with the words sitting in you, simply the child, as if it is the simplest thing in the world. As if a child is not, at this moment and in this century, the most significant rearrangement of your life that you can imagine, affecting your body and your income and your marriage and your future, and the tin box in the bottom drawer, and the extra room you have been saving toward, and the version of yourself you've been building in these 8 months since the wedding. As if the child is not, at this moment, also the object of a terror that has been sitting underneath everything else this whole time, quiet and specific, shaped exactly like the memory of your mother going into the back bedroom when you were 8 years old, but also the warmth of the sunshine and the smell of the city that is flowers and horses and coal smoke and the bread smell from the bakery on the corner, and your hands in the pockets of your coat, one of them resting against the slight curve of your lower abdomen that is beginning, finally, to be undeniably there, simply the child. Now we should talk properly about the thing that the Victorian medical establishment is most interested in when it comes to early pregnancy diagnosis, because it will tell you something both about the science and about the peculiarity of the era, and because it explains some of what Mrs. Hartley's fairly certain is about, and why the certainty that the women hold and the certainty that the doctors hold are slightly different in character. The Victorian medical literature on pregnancy diagnosis is extensive and specific and divided roughly into two categories: the certain signs and the uncertain signs. This distinction matters, and the Victorians take it seriously. The uncertain signs, what they also call probable or presumptive signs, are everything we have discussed so far: the missed period, the nausea, the breast changes, the heightened smell. All of these are consistent with pregnancy. None of them are absolutely diagnostic of pregnancy, because every single one of them can, in principle, be produced by conditions other than pregnancy. The doctors know this. They are careful about it. The certain signs, the diagnostic evidence that cannot be produced by any condition other than pregnancy, are fewer and arrive later. By 1863, the medical literature recognizes 4 certain signs. First, the fetal heartbeat. Audible through the stethoscope pressed against the abdominal wall from approximately 18 to 20 weeks in most women. When the doctor hears this, the characteristic rapid beat, around 120 to 140 times per minute, distinctly different from the mother's own slower heartbeat. There is no ambiguity. The child is alive and present and has its own cardiovascular rhythm. Second, the perception of fetal movements by the examiner's hand, different from the mother's own perception of quickening. This is movements palpable through the abdominal wall, strong enough for another person's hand to detect. This occurs later, generally in the second half of pregnancy, when the movements are vigorous enough to be externally perceptible. Third, the ballottement sign, a technique where the examiner, performing an internal examination, gives a gentle push to the fetus floating in the amniotic fluid and feels it bounce back against the fingers. This can be performed from approximately 16 to 20 weeks. It requires an experienced examiner and sufficient amniotic fluid and the right position of the fetus. Fourth, the presence of fetal parts palpable through the abdominal wall in later pregnancy. By the 3rd trimester, an experienced practitioner can actually palpate, feel through the abdominal wall and the position of the fetus, the head here, the back there, the limbs in this position. This is unmistakable and requires no explanation. All of the certain signs arrive in the 2nd trimester at the earliest. Before that, the doctor is working entirely in the realm of the probable and the presumptive. And this is why the Victorian medical establishment, which prizes certainty and hedges its language accordingly, is often frustratingly indefinite in the early months. The women know first. The women trust their bodies first. The doctors confirm later, when the evidence is no longer deniable. There is also a 5th thing, not usually listed separately but important in practice: the visual observation of fetal movement through the abdominal wall. In later pregnancy, the 3rd trimester especially, you can see the baby move. The surface of the belly shifts and ripples as the child inside repositions itself. A foot pushes against the skin from inside. An elbow. Sometimes a shape suggests itself briefly and then withdraws. This is perhaps the most viscerally strange and affecting of all the visible signs of pregnancy, and it will be, when it happens to you months from now, probably the single most astonishing thing you have ever seen. But that is months from now. What is now? What is May 1863? With the sunshine and the 14 weeks and Dr. Pemberton's proceeding normally, is this: you are becoming visible, not dramatically, not yet to strangers, but to people who know you. Mrs. Hartley has been able to see it for a month. Thomas can see it when you are undressed. Though you've had no specific conversation about this, it is something that has entered the awareness of your marriage silently, through the same channels as most of its knowledge, through the shared daily proximity of two people living together, sleeping together, knowing each other through the evidence of ordinary life. The dress has been let out at the waist seam 2 inches by your own hands, with thread matched carefully to the original. You did this on a Saturday afternoon while Thomas was at the library reading room on Rosoman Street. And when he came home you were wearing it, and he didn't say anything, and neither did you. But the conversation happened anyway, in the space between you, in the ordinary air of the rooms. You cannot conceal it much longer. And there is a particular afternoon in mid-May when you do something you have been putting off. You go, alone, on a Thursday afternoon when the light is good and the air is warm enough that the trip to the other side of the borough doesn't seem impossible, to see the midwife that Mrs. Hartley has recommended. Her name is Mrs. Calloway. She lives and works from a house on Warner Street, a 10-minute walk away, in a neighbourhood similar to yours. Terraced houses, working families, the geography of moderate poverty managed with dignity. Her front room serves as a consulting room. There is a table and 2 chairs and a shelf with several medical books and a collection of bottles and a folded stack of clean linen. Mrs. Calloway is perhaps 55, small, with capable hands and a manner that reminds you of Mrs. Hartley, but is more professional, more deliberate in its communication. She has been a midwife for 25 years, which means she has attended approximately how many births? You don't ask, but you estimate. Perhaps 50 a year, perhaps 60, perhaps more in a busy practice. Over 25 years, that is 1,000 or more. She has seen nearly everything. She examines you more thoroughly than Dr. Pemberton did, and with considerably less ceremony about it. She is matter-of-fact about the examination in a way that only someone who has done this 1,000 times can be. Efficient and respectful simultaneously. And when she's done, she tells you what she sees in plain language, without the elaborate indirection of the medical men. You're about 14 weeks, consistent with what you've told me. The baby's positioned normally, head down, which is where we want it and where it'll likely stay. The uterus is measuring correctly for the dates. You're slightly anemic, which is common. You'll want more iron. She looks at you directly. You're in good health, Mrs. Marsh. Continue what you're doing. How will I know, you ask? And then, because this is vague, when it gets closer, how will I know it's starting? Mrs. Calloway nods. She knows what you're really asking, not just about the mechanics, about the thing underneath the mechanics. She has heard this question in many forms from many women, and she knows that the question about recognition is also a question about control, about agency, about whether you will be prepared or whether it will simply take you the way it took your mother. The contractions begin, she says, different from the ordinary cramps you might feel, more regular, coming at intervals, and the interval shortens over time. There will likely be a show, a small amount of blood or mucus when the cervix begins to open, which can be days before labour or hours, so don't take it as an immediate sign. Your waters may go before the contractions or with them. When the contractions are coming every 5 minutes and lasting a minute each, you send for me. How long does it take? From the first contraction to the end, anywhere from 4 hours to 2 days for a first child, usually somewhere in the middle. 2 days, the span of it, the thing your mother went through 4 times, the 4th of which killed her, and which you are apparently going to go through in approximately 5 months in 2 rooms above a cobbler's shop on Rosebery Avenue. You look at your hands in your lap, And the fever, you say. Mrs. Calloway is quiet for a moment. She knows about your mother. You told her briefly at the beginning of the consultation. Puerperal fever, she says. Yes, the greatest risk of the lying-in period. And there are things I can tell you about how to reduce that risk, and the most important of them is this. I wash my hands every time before and during with carbolic soap. I wash the instruments. I wash the linens. She meets your eyes steadily. I have not lost a mother to fever in 4 years. Not one. The ones I've lost were illness before, or conditions during that couldn't be helped. But not fever, because fever comes from infection, and infection comes from unclean hands and unclean instruments. Semmelweis proved it in Vienna 15 years ago, and most of the doctors didn't believe him, and too many still don't, but I know it, and I practice accordingly. Something in you releases, not fear. The fear is still there, but something underneath the fear, some specific weight you have been carrying. 4 years, you say. 4 years, she confirms. You pay her the 6pence consultation fee. You walk home through the May afternoon with the children playing in the square, and the plane trees green, and the city making its sounds around you, and you think about clean hands and carbolic soap, and a woman who has attended 1,000 births and lost no mother to fever in 4 years. June comes in warm and slow, the city heavy with it, the streets smelling of horse and dust and whatever the Thames is doing at low tide, which is never pleasant, and in summer becomes something that people who live near the river learn to simply stop noticing, the way you stop noticing the leather from downstairs, the way you stop noticing anything that is always there. You are 17 weeks along, and then one evening in the 2nd week of June, you are sitting in the chair by the fire after supper, the fire low because it is warm enough that you don't need it high, just enough for the light of it, and Thomas is at the table with his ledger going over something, and you're not doing anything particular. Your hands in your lap over the changed shape of your abdomen, the shape that is now clearly, undeniably, visibly there. The dress let out twice more, the stays set aside entirely in favour of Mrs. Hartley's nursing corset, the body no longer pretending to be what it was before, and you feel it. Not pain, not pressure, something else entirely, something that has no predecessor in your experience of having a body, something that is movement, unmistakably movement, but from the inside, from somewhere inside you that you have never felt from the inside before, small, fluttering, like, and you will reach for this comparison later, trying to explain it to Mrs. Hartley, trying to put it into words that make sense, like a bird in a closed hand, the lightest possible pressure from within, there and then not there, then there again. You go completely still. Your hands press flat against your abdomen. Nothing. A moment of nothing. You think, I imagined it. I have been waiting for it so long that I've invented it. Your hands are still on the tight, warm curve of your belly, and the chair is hard under you, and the fire makes its small sounds, and Thomas turns a page in his ledger. Then it comes again. Unmistakable this time. A small distinct movement from inside you, separate from every other sensation your body produces, completely its own thing. The first physical communication from a person who does not yet have language and is making do with this instead. Here, I am here. Thomas, you say. He looks up. You cannot speak for a moment. Speak. Your eyes are doing something embarrassing. The particular thing that happens when something is too large to process immediately and has to come out somewhere. You press your lips together and look at the fire. It moved, you say. Thomas puts down the pen. He crosses the room and crouches beside the chair, and you take his hand and press it against the side of your abdomen where the feeling was, and you both wait, and nothing happens for a full minute, and then, there. A small push, outward, against your skin, against his palm. His face does something you have never seen it do before, something that breaks through the habitual reserve, the careful management of expression, something entirely unguarded. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't need to. This is what the Victorian women were waiting for. This is the confirmation that Mrs. Hartley spoke of, that Dr. Pemberton mentioned as a clinical landmark, that the legal tradition had built a whole moral framework around, not the missed course, not the morning nausea, not the examination with its hedged language and its consistent with early pregnancy. This, the child moving, the first tangible proof, the evidence that requires no interpretation, that needs no practitioner's expertise to validate, that speaks directly and entirely to the person experiencing it. The thing the body has been building in the dark for 4 months, making itself known finally in the only way available to it. I am here. This is how Victorian women knew. Not from a test, not from a doctor's confirmation, though the doctors confirmed it. Not from any external instrument or procedure or piece of modern medical technology. From this, the patient-accumulated reading of their own bodies, the slow, careful translation of physical signals in the absence of any other language, and then finally, undeniably, the movement. The first moment of communication from a person who is not yet born. The body knew first. The body always knew first. The women read it. In the mornings, in the dark, with their hands on their own abdomens, with the bread on the nightstand and the fire going out and the city making its 3 million person noise outside. They read it the way you learn to read anything in the absence of formal instruction. By paying close attention, by comparing notes with people who have been there before, by trusting the evidence of experience over the silence of official channels. Mrs. Hartley knew. She knew before you told her, and she waited. And she gave you the information you needed in the measure you needed it. The practical knowledge of a woman who had done this 6 times, and survived it 6 times, and buried 2 children and kept going and known every time from the beginning, from the body outward. July passes, and August. Your body at 24 weeks is undeniable now. The shape of you announces itself before you do, and you have stopped trying to manage the announcement. Thomas sees it every day. Mrs. Hartley sees it on the landing. The butcher on Exmouth Street has started saying "Morning, Mrs." with a particular tone that contains acknowledgement. Mrs. Price on the first floor, who delivered her 3rd child in June and is already back on the stairs with the coal scuttle, looking at you with the comfortable solidarity of someone 6 months ahead. The sewing continues. You have slowed. You cannot pretend otherwise. The commissions taking slightly longer than they did, the mornings starting later, the backache by the afternoons genuine and persistent enough that you have taken to the practice of lying down on your side for an hour after dinner, a pillow wedged behind your back, the only position that reliably relieves it. But you continue. The bodices and the cuffs, and in August, a commission for wedding dress trim work that requires the finest thread and the best morning light, which you give it, carefully, because the money is good and because your hands still know what they are doing, even if the rest of you is rearranged. The movement now is constant, not always perceptible. There are hours of stillness, but sufficiently frequent that you have built a relationship with it, the same way you build relationships with all things constant, by noticing the patterns. The child is active in the evenings, generally after supper when you're sitting still. Active also around midnight, which you know because it wakes you, not dramatically, just enough. A repositioning, a push against the inside of your ribs, which are, you're discovering, both more and less accommodating than you had imagined. Your ribs are not accommodating. There is a foot, you're fairly certain, that periodically makes contact with your lower right ribs in a way that takes your breath very briefly. You press back against it gently, and it moves. This is astonishing every time. September. Mrs. Calloway examines you at 32 weeks and confirms what you have been tracking through your own hands and your own attention. The child is head down, positioned correctly, of normal size, healthy heartbeat detected through the stethoscope she presses to your abdomen. You hear it too, that rapid small drumming, 130 times per minute, like a watch wound too tight, like something urgent and ongoing. And the pregnancy is proceeding as it should. 6 weeks, approximately, she says. 6 weeks. You go home and sit by the fire and think about 6 weeks. 6 weeks that contain everything that has ever frightened you. Everything you've been holding at arm's length since the morning you first lay completely still in the dark and waited to find out if moving made it worse. 6 weeks that contain your mother's absence and Mrs. Calloway's 4 years without a fever death, and the clean hands and the carbolic soap and the tin box that now has £4 and 3 shillings in it, accumulated through 6 months of continued work, and Thomas's shilling and sixpence extra, and the careful management of everything. You are ready as you can be, which is to say, not ready at all, and also more ready than you have ever been for anything. Now, let's talk about sleep. Because you are, after all, here for sleep. And because sleep in the last weeks of pregnancy in 1863 is a particular negotiation, a complicated nightly arrangement between your body and the mattress, and the 3 pillows you have accumulated for the purpose of propping and supporting and making the night survivable. You sleep on your left side. Mrs. Calloway recommends this. It keeps the weight of the uterus from pressing on the major blood vessels along the spine, improves circulation to the baby, reduces the edema in your ankles that has become a feature of the later weeks. You sleep on your left side with 1 pillow under your head and 1 between your knees and 1 wedged behind your back. And Thomas, who is a man who makes accommodations without being asked, sleeps on his small remaining section of the mattress without complaint. The nights are full of waking, not distressed waking, just the ordinary waking of a body that has too much happening in it to stay consistently unconscious for 8 hours. You wake to shift position. You wake because the child has decided that 3 in the morning is the optimal time for what feels like a complete reorganization of its internal geography. You wake because your bladder, at 34 weeks, has very little patience. You wake and lie in the dark and listen to the city's nighttime sounds, the watchman's call, the distant wheel on cobbles, the dog somewhere that seems to have an opinion it cannot let go of, and then you sink back into sleep, and it comes for you like something warm and patient, like something that has been waiting, like the tide. October. You will not write about October, not directly, not the hours of it, not the specifics. What you will say is this: Mrs. Calloway's hands were clean, the linen was clean. Thomas sat on the other side of the door and you could hear him from inside the room, very occasionally the sound of his breathing, the sound of a man staying as close as he was permitted to be. Mrs. Hartley was there, in the room, in the way that Mrs. Hartley is always somewhere in your life, practical and present and saying the right thing at the right moment without excessive sentiment. The fire was good, and then there is a sound in the room that is not a sound you have heard before, a very specific and unmistakable sound, the sound of a person announcing itself, small and outraged and entirely present, and Mrs. Calloway places into your arm a weight that is nothing like you expected and exactly like you expected, warm and astonishing and real. A girl, 7 pounds, all her fingers, all her toes. Thomas, let in, stands in the doorway and looks at the two of you with his glasses slightly askew from the way he has been pressing his face into his hands, and his expression is the same one you saw in June when he felt the first movement, the unguarded one, the one with all the management taken out of it. Normal, you say, because that is the word that has been your talisman since February. Dr. Pemberton said everything is normal, Thomas laughs. It is not quite a laugh. It is the sound of a man who has been holding something for 8 months and is now putting it down. Here is what you learned. You learned that the body knows before the mind admits it, that the signals come early and they come consistently, and they are readable, all of them, every single one. The lateness and the nausea and the smell and the tiredness and the tenderness and the slow, persistent change of the shape of you. All of it language, all of it information, all of it the body doing what it does when it is doing something enormous. You learned that the knowledge lives in the women. Not exclusively. Dr. Pemberton was useful in his way, with his hedged language and his clean hands and his notebook. Mrs. Calloway was essential, but the first knowing, the practical knowing, the daily navigational knowledge of how to eat and how to sleep, and how to manage the mornings and what to loosen and when to worry and when not to, that lived in Mrs. Hartley, in the neighbour on the landing, in the women who had been there before, and who passed the information along in the way that things passed before there were institutions to pass them, through conversation and proximity and the low-voiced exchange of women whose hands were busy with something else. You learned that the body can be trusted, not blindly, not without help, but trusted. Its signals are real, its protests are meaningful, its changes are not imagination. The nausea is doing something. The smell is doing something. The tiredness is not weakness. The body working this hard without credit, without acknowledgement, building a person from nothing using only what you can give it. This is not nothing. This is in fact extraordinary. You knew before the doctor confirmed it. You knew before the tests that weren't tests. You knew from the bread on the nightstand and the coal on the fire, and Mrs. Hartley's 2 knocks on the wall and your own hands going again and again to rest on the place where something was happening that had no other way of making itself known. You knew. The women always knew. Centuries will pass. The city you know will change past recognition. The leather smell from the cobbler's shop below will be replaced by exhaust and coffee, and the particular electrical smell of a city that runs on different energy. The 2 rooms on Rosebery Avenue will eventually be demolished and rebuilt again. The street widened, the address changed. Someone else's ordinary life occupying the same coordinates. The pregnancy test will be invented, the hormone detected, the plus sign or the minus sign appearing in 2 minutes, bought from a pharmacy, taken alone in a bathroom, the result arriving before anyone else knows there's a question. The uncertainty of those first weeks compressed into 2 minutes and a line on a stick. But the body will still know first. It always will. The nausea that arrives before the test is taken, the tenderness that precedes the confirmation, the smell that changes before you can explain why. This is still the body's first language, still the original signal, still the thing that arrives before any external instrument catches up. and the knowledge still passes between women, still lives in the conversations on landings and in waiting rooms and in the texts and the voice messages and the threads where someone asks and a dozen women answer with their own experience, their own first mornings, their own bread on the nightstand, their own version of waiting completely still to find out if moving makes it worse. Some things don't change. The body doesn't change, not in the ways that matter. The human need for someone to tell you what it means doesn't change. The value of a woman who has been there before and can say, this is normal, this is what it does, this passes, you're not imagining it, you're going to be all right. This doesn't change. The hands on the abdomen in the dark don't change. The waiting for the movement doesn't change. The moment it arrives, the first flutter, the first push, the first small insistent here I am from inside, that doesn't change. That never changes. Right now, wherever you are, you're warm. Or warm enough. You've been still for long enough that the blanket has shaped itself around you, that the weight of the day has settled into the mattress, that the sounds outside have moved from information to background, from the kind of sound you process to the kind of sound that simply is. Your hands are still. Whatever they were doing today, and whatever they built or carried or worked at or worried about, they are still now. And the still hands are the beginning of the end of consciousness, the body's own signal that it is setting things down for the night. This is what Ellen Marsh felt in October of 1863, in the weeks after the birth that didn't kill her, in the 2 rooms above the cobbler's shop on Rosebery Avenue, with the girl sleeping in the drawer they had made into a crib and Thomas beside her, and the tin box in the bottom of the wardrobe now holding £6 and 4 shillings, because the women at Mrs. Alderton's establishment had taken up a small collection. Because women do these things, they have always done these things quietly and without ceremony. She lay in the dark and felt the extraordinary ordinariness of having survived, of being warm, of being, after 8 months of constant internal construction, simply herself again. Herself and more than herself. Herself changed by the process of what the body had done, the shape of her permanently altered in small ways, the knowledge permanently added. Warm enough, safe enough, full enough. Let the sounds go. Let the thoughts slow the way they slow when there is no longer any urgency, when the day's work is done and the night's work is simply this: breathing, resting, the long, patient work of the body recharging itself for tomorrow. Tomorrow there will be more. There is always more. But that is tomorrow, and tomorrow can take care of itself. Right now there is only the dark and the warmth and the particular quiet that comes after a long and difficult and ultimately survivable thing. The child moves, very gently, one last time, and then everything is still. Good night.